The morning on Samuel's ranch began the same way it always did. The sky was still soft and pale, and a thin layer of mist covered the wide fields that stretched out like a quiet green blanket. Birds were only beginning to wake, making short, gentle sounds from the trees near the house. Samuel stepped out of his old wooden porch, wearing the same brown hat he had worn for many years. He breathed in the cool air and smiled slightly. This peaceful land had been his home since he was a child, just as it had been his father's and grandfather's home before that. Every sound, every smell, and every path on this ranch was familiar to him. He believed he understood everything about it. Samuel began his daily walk around the property. He liked checking the cattle, the fences, the water pumps, and the far corners of the land before the sun climbed too high. He followed the dirt trail that led toward the back fields. The grass brushed lightly against his boots, and he enjoyed the soft crunch of the earth under each step. It was quiet, peaceful, and completely normal. Nothing suggested that this morning would be different from any other. But then he heard something strange. At first, it was so faint that Samuel thought it might be the wind. A soft, shaky sound drifted through the still air. He paused and listened more closely. It came again, this time clearer, though still weak. It sounded like a person calling out. Samuel frowned. People rarely visited this part of the ranch, and the voice didn't sound strong or confident. Instead, it sounded tired, almost desperate. He turned his head in the direction of the sound. He waited. For a moment, the fields were quiet again. Then he heard it once more, this time a full sentence, spoken with trembling effort. "Please, I am begging you, untie it." Samuel froze. His heart gave a small jolt. This was not something he expected to hear here, in the early morning, in a place where he thought he was alone. He looked around carefully. The sound seemed to be coming from near the old fence line at the far end of the ranch. He took a steady breath, gathered his nerves, and began walking quickly toward the voice. As he walked, his mind filled with questions. Who could possibly be out here? Was someone hurt, lost, or confused? The words "untie it" repeated themselves in his mind. What did that mean? What needed to be untied? The closer he got, the more clearly he could hear soft breathing and small sounds of movement. Samuel stepped around a tall patch of grass, and then he saw him. An elderly man sat near one of the old fence posts. His clothes were dusty, and his face looked worn and tired, as if he had been traveling for a long time. His hands rested on his knees, but they trembled slightly. The man wasn't a ranch worker, and he wasn't someone Samuel recognized. He was a stranger. Samuel approached slowly, not wanting to surprise him. "Sir, are you all right?" Samuel asked gently. The old man lifted his head. His eyes looked relieved to finally see someone. He cleared his throat, and with effort, he pointed toward the fence post beside him. "Please," he said again, "I am begging you, untie it." Samuel's gaze followed the direction of the man's trembling hand. Tied tightly around the old wooden post was a weathered piece of rope, thick, gray, and stiff with age. Samuel knew that rope. Everyone in his family knew it. It had been there for many decades. His grandfather had tied it long before Samuel was born, and tradition said it should never be touched. The rope marked a boundary, at least that was what Samuel had been told all his life. No one ever explained the full story behind it, but the rule was clear. Leave it tied. No matter what. No questions asked. And now here was a stranger, asking him to break that rule. Samuel felt his body tense. He took one small step back. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. His family believed in keeping old traditions alive. Even if he didn't fully understand the meaning, he respected them. That rope was part of that tradition. He looked back at the old man sitting on the ground. The man's face was filled with a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Samuel knelt down slowly beside him. "Why do you want it untied?" he asked softly. The man's voice shook. It should have been undone a long time ago. I have walked far, because I needed to see it undone." before it is too late. Samuel studied the man carefully. He didn't look dangerous. He looked like someone carrying a heavy memory. Someone who had been holding something inside for decades. "You walked here?" Samuel asked. The man nodded gently. "I used to know this land," he whispered. "Long ago." Samuel felt a strange pull in his chest. The old man's words didn't fully make sense yet, but they didn't feel harmful. They felt honest, real, but Samuel also felt the weight of his family's tradition pressing down on him. The old man looked at the rope again, then back at Samuel. His eyes were full of quiet pleading. "Please, untie it." Samuel swallowed. His heart felt caught between two things: duty and compassion. Tradition said the rope must stay tied. His mind said he needed to respect his family's beliefs, but the stranger's voice, filled with sincerity, made him hesitate. He turned his gaze toward the rope again. It looked ordinary, just an old piece of rope on an old fence, but to Samuel, it represented years of unspoken history, things he never questioned, rules he simply followed. He stood up slowly, brushing dust from his hands. The old man watched him closely, waiting for his next move. Samuel stepped closer to the rope. He raised his hand but stopped it inches away. His fingers hovered in the air. He felt the memory of his father's voice in his mind. "Never untie that rope, Sam. That's the way our family keeps things." Samuel exhaled slowly. Why had they kept things that way? Why had no one told him the real reason? Why did the rope matter so much? He lowered his hand and stepped back again. The old man's shoulders slumped slightly, as if he feared the answer he didn't hear. Samuel wasn't heartless. He simply didn't understand enough yet. He didn't want to break something important without knowing the whole truth. But he also didn't want to ignore a man who seemed absolutely sincere. "Let me help you stand," Samuel said gently. "You seem tired." He carefully helped the man to his feet. The old man leaned on Samuel for support. "What is your name?" Samuel asked quietly. "Robert," the old man replied. I was someone connected to this land many years ago." There was something in the way he said those words, something heavy, something deep. Samuel felt both curiosity and caution rising inside him. The morning sun had begun to rise higher. The mist was thinning, revealing more of the wide, open fields around them. The light fell softly on the rope, making it look even older and more worn. Samuel didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, he helped Robert walk a few steps away from the fence, so they could talk more comfortably. They moved slowly, and Samuel could feel how weak Robert was. He set him down near a fallen log where the man could rest. "What happened here, Robert?" Samuel asked. "Why is this rope important to you?" Robert looked up at him with tired eyes. "It is not the rope itself," he said quietly. "It is what it represents." Samuel felt a quiet chill run through him. He sensed that whatever story lay behind that rope would challenge everything he had been told, everything he had believed, everything he had accepted without question. And yet, he also felt a strange readiness to listen. The land around them was quiet, as if waiting too. Samuel didn't untie the rope that morning, but he also didn't walk away. Instead, he stayed with Robert, sensing that whatever he was about to learn would change the way he looked at that fence, the rope, and even his family's traditions. For the first time in his life, Samuel wondered if traditions always came from wisdom, or if sometimes they came from misunderstandings left untouched for too long. And with that simple thought, the peaceful morning on the ranch took a turn Samuel would never forget. Samuel sat beside Robert, the elderly man whose sudden appearance had turned an ordinary morning into something strange and important. The air around them felt still, as if the land itself was waiting to hear what Robert had to say. Samuel tried to read the old man's expression. There was tiredness in his eyes, but also something deeper, something like an old memory that refused to rest. Samuel offered the man a bottle of water, and Robert took it with slightly shaking hands. He drank slowly, as if each sip helped him gather strength. When he finally set the bottle down, Samuel knew the moment had come to hear the truth behind the rope that had confused him since childhood. "You said you used to know this land," Samuel said softly. "How?" Robert took a slow breath and looked out over the fields. "When I was young, My family lived not far from here, he said. Your grandfather and my father were close friends once. Samuel was surprised. He had never heard this. His grandfather's name was familiar in many stories, but none of those stories included Robert or his family. He didn't interrupt. He wanted to understand. Robert continued. Our families shared tools, shared meals, and shared work. There was a time when we cared about each other like relatives. Samuel felt a small warmth in his chest hearing this. The idea of two families working together and sharing a bond sounded simple and good. But something about Robert's face told him the story was not a happy one. What happened? Samuel asked quietly. Robert sighed. Something changed. Something went wrong. And after that, nothing was the same. He lifted his hand and pointed in the direction of the old fence where the rope hung. That rope was tied the day everything fell apart. It was not tied for the land. It was tied as a mark of division, a sign that our families would no longer walk the same path. Samuel felt a light shock run through him. He had always believed the rope was a boundary for ranching purposes. His father and grandfather never explained anything else. They simply said it must stay tied forever. That was the rule, that was the way, and Samuel had never questioned it. But now, hearing Robert's voice filled with emotion, he realized that something far more personal was attached to that rope. Why didn't anyone tell me? Samuel murmured, almost to himself. Robert looked at him with gentle understanding. Sometimes, people hide the past because they believe it protects the future. Sometimes, they think silence is easier than truth. Samuel swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. He thought of his father, a quiet man who followed traditions with steady loyalty. Perhaps his father didn't know the whole story either. Perhaps only Samuel's grandfather knew the true reason for the rope. Robert's voice softened. Your grandfather was a strong man, but he also carried heavy feelings. When something happened between him and my father, neither of them knew how to solve it. Instead of talking, they allowed pride to guide them. Samuel lowered his eyes. He suddenly felt the rope's presence even though it was not in front of him. It was like a silent line drawn between two families. Holding a story that had been kept in the shadows, Robert rested his hands on his knees. I was a boy then, he said. I remember standing with my father, watching your grandfather tie that rope with firm hands. No one explained anything to me, but I understood one thing. Something important was broken. Samuel listened carefully, picturing the memory. He imagined two families standing apart, a piece of rope carrying all the tension that words failed to express. It hurt to imagine his family involved in something like that, but it also made the rope's existence finally make sense. Do you know why they argued? Samuel asked. Robert was silent for a long moment. His lips pressed together as if he was choosing his words with care. It wasn't about land, he said slowly. It wasn't about cattle. It was about trust. A misunderstanding grew bigger and bigger, until it looked impossible to fix. And when two people hold on to their side of the story too tightly, even friendship can break. Samuel nodded slowly. He understood how misunderstandings could grow. He had seen smaller disagreements turn into big problems when people refused to speak openly. Robert took another breath. Your grandfather believed he was protecting his family by tying that rope. My father believed he was being shut out unfairly. Both men felt hurt. And both men made choices they regretted later. He paused, and Samuel sensed that the next part of the story was even harder to tell. My father wanted to untie the rope one day, Robert continued, his voice almost a whisper. He believed peace could return if someone simply took the first step. But he never got the chance. Time passed. People got older. And the rope stayed tied. Samuel felt a deep ache in his chest. The thought of two men wanting to resolve their differences but never finding the right moment made the story feel even more painful. Why did you come back now? Samuel asked gently. Robert looked at him with eyes filled with years of emotion. Because I am the last one who remembers that day. The last one who saw the rope tied. I've carried this memory inside me like a stone. I promised myself that before my time ends, I would try one last time to see it undone. Samuel felt the seriousness of Robert's words settle heavily on him. He wasn't just talking about the rope, he was talking about healing something that had been broken for decades. Robert continued softly. I walked here because my heart would not rest otherwise. I thought maybe if I saw the rope untied, even if only once, I could finally let go of the past. Samuel breathed slowly. He felt something shift inside him. The rope was not just a piece of old material tied to a fence. It was a symbol of pain that had lasted far too long. It represented misunderstandings, unspoken apologies, and lost connections. I didn't know, Samuel said quietly. No one told me any of this. Robert nodded gently. Sometimes the older generation keeps silent, thinking they are protecting the younger ones. But silence can carry its own weight. Samuel looked across the fields, imagining the generations who had lived here. He thought about the traditions he had respected without question. For the first time, he wondered how many other stories had been hidden behind those traditions. Robert's voice grew calm but steady. You are not your grandfather. You are not responsible for the choices he made. But you do have the chance to choose differently. Samuel felt those words land deep in his heart. He wasn't sure what he would do yet. But he knew he couldn't ignore this truth anymore. The breeze moved lightly across the fields, carrying the scent of fresh grass. Samuel glanced toward the fence. The rope looked small from where he sat, but knowing its history made it feel bigger than ever. Robert kept speaking, but his tone was softer now, filled with memories instead of sorrow. He spoke about the early days when the families worked together, shared stories, and laughed under the same sun. He described how the two friends, Samuel's grandfather and his own father, had once trusted each other deeply. Hearing about those days made Samuel feel both warm and sad, because he realized how easily good things could be lost. As the sun rose higher, the light grew stronger, touching the land with a golden glow. Samuel noticed that Robert looked tired again. The long walk and the weight of the memories had clearly taken a toll on him. Let me help you get some rest, Samuel suggested. You shouldn't sit out here too long. Robert nodded gratefully. Samuel helped him stand slowly, and they walked toward the shade of a nearby tree. Samuel laid his jacket on the ground so Robert could sit more comfortably. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply as if relieved to finally share a story he had carried for a lifetime. Samuel sat beside him, thinking about everything he had heard. The truth had opened a door inside him. He understood now that the rope was not something sacred. It was something unresolved, a sign of hurt that should have been spoken about long ago. And as he looked out at the fields, he felt a quiet but powerful thought rise inside him. Maybe traditions should not be followed blindly. Maybe understanding the past was more important than repeating it. But even with this new clarity, Samuel still didn't know what to do about the rope. He wasn't ready yet. The decision was too heavy to make without thinking deeply. For now, he chose to sit with Robert, letting the land rest in silence, allowing both of them time to breathe, to think, and to understand the importance of what came next. Because Samuel knew that whatever choice he made later would not just affect him, it would affect the memory of two families and the future of the land they had once shared as friends. Samuel woke up earlier than usual the next day, even before the sun had fully risen. All night long, he had been thinking about the story Robert had shared. It stayed in his mind like a quiet echo, pulling his thoughts in different directions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the old rope tied to the fence and heard Robert's tired voice explaining the truth behind it. The house felt still and silent, the way it often did before dawn. But inside Samuel's heart, there was nothing calm. He felt a strange mix of curiosity, confusion, and responsibility. He had spent his whole life believing that the rope marked a simple boundary, a harmless tradition. But after learning the real story, he felt something inside him shift. It was like discovering that a familiar road he had walked for years suddenly led somewhere completely different. Samuel sat at the kitchen table with a cup of warm tea in his hands. He didn't drink it. He just stared at it while his mind replayed every detail Robert had told him. The friendship between the two families. The misunderstanding. The broken trust. The silence that followed. It all painted a picture he had never seen before. He wondered why his father never spoke about it. Maybe he didn't know the full story. Or maybe he believed it was better left alone. Some wounds, Samuel realized, were quietly passed down through generations without explanation. They simply became tradition, even when no one remembered the reason behind them. He set down the cup and made a decision. He needed to know more. He needed to understand what really happened. Without that understanding, he couldn't decide what to do about the rope, so he walked to the storage room. A place filled with old boxes, dusty shelves, and forgotten memories. The storage room smelled faintly of old paper and wood. Samuel switched on the dim light and looked around. His father had kept many things after Samuel's grandfather passed away: journals, letters, tools, and boxes marked with dates that had faded over time. Samuel opened a large wooden box labeled with his grandfather's name. Inside were several old notebooks, their covers worn and edges yellowed. He picked up the first one carefully, as if it might crumble in his hands. When he opened it, he saw his grandfather's handwriting, strong, steady, and slightly slanted. He flipped through the pages slowly. Most entries were simple notes about ranch work, weather, or the cattle. But then, near the middle, he found something different, a short entry written many years ago. He read it once, then again, and again. The entry mentioned Robert's father. It mentioned a disagreement. It mentioned a mistake. And in a few simple sentences, Samuel understood that his grandfather had tied the rope not out of wisdom or strength but out of emotion, hurt feelings that grew larger than they should have. The entry ended with something that made Samuel pause. One day, maybe I will untie it. But today is not that day. Samuel let out a slow breath. His grandfather had never found the courage to return and fix what had been broken. Years had passed. He grew older. Life became busy. And eventually, the rope stayed tied simply because it had been tied for so long. Samuel gently closed the notebook and sat on the floor beside the box. The quiet room felt heavy. But not in a frightening way, more in a meaningful way. He thought about Robert's long journey to the ranch. He thought about how important it was for him to see the rope undone before his time ended. Samuel realized something important. Robert wasn't asking him to break tradition. He was asking him to end a misunderstanding that had lived longer than it should have. After sitting in silence for a while, Samuel stood up. He placed the notebook back in the box and closed it carefully. Then he walked out of the storage room with a new sense of clarity, though his heart still felt heavy. Later that morning, Samuel went outside and made his way toward the far end of the ranch. The sun was higher now, warming the land with soft light. When he reached the fence, he saw Robert already standing there. The old man looked tired but hopeful, as if he had spent the night waiting for Samuel's decision. Robert looked up when he saw him. There was no pressure in his eyes, no demand, only quiet hope. "Good morning," Samuel said softly. Robert nodded. "Good morning." Samuel walked up to the rope. He reached out his hand but didn't touch it yet. His fingers hovered above it, just like the day before. The old rope looked even more worn than he remembered. It had been tied tightly, its knot small but extremely firm, like a symbol of stubbornness from the past. Robert watched him quietly, not speaking a word. Samuel appreciated that. He needed a moment not for tradition's sake, but for understanding. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about his father. He thought about how easily stories get lost when no one speaks about them. The rope had stayed tied because silence had taken the place of conversation. But today, Samuel was choosing something different. He took a slow breath, reached out, and wrapped his fingers around the rope. The knot felt rough against his skin. His heart beat a little faster. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. He wasn't just untying a piece of rope. He was untying years of silence, misunderstanding, and distance between two families. Even so, he hesitated for a moment longer. This decision mattered. It had weight. Robert's voice came softly behind him. "You're not breaking anything. You're doing what should have been done long ago." Samuel closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting those words settle in his heart. When he opened them again, he pulled gently at the knot. It didn't loosen at first. It was stiff from years of sun, rain, and wind. But Samuel didn't rush. He worked with care, easing the knot little by little. It felt almost symbolic, like every small tug was part of releasing the past, slowly, gently, respectfully. Finally, after several careful movements, the knot loosened. The rope gave way, and then it fell. It slid off the post with a quiet, soft drop onto the grass. For a moment, Samuel simply stared at it. The post looked strangely bare, without the rope wrapped around it. When he turned around, he saw Robert standing still, his eyes filled with deep emotion. The old man brought a hand to his chest as if feeling a heavy weight lift from his heart. "Thank you," Robert whispered. "You don't know what this means." Samuel felt his throat tighten. He stepped closer to the old man and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think I'm starting to understand," he said softly. They both stood in silence for a while, letting the moment sink in. The wind moved gently across the field, brushing against the grass and carrying the soft sound of leaves swaying in the distance. Everything felt calm, calmer than Samuel had ever felt in this part of the ranch. After a few long moments, Samuel leaned down and picked up the rope. He folded it carefully, not as a symbol of division anymore, but as a reminder of what had been finally resolved. Robert sank onto the grass, not out of weakness but out of emotion. Samuel sat beside him. They looked over the land together, each feeling something settle peacefully within their hearts. Robert spoke after a long pause. "Your grandfather would have wanted this. I believe he hoped someone would understand one day." Samuel nodded. "I think so too." With the rope no longer tied, the air around them felt open, light, almost new. Samuel realized that healing didn't always require big actions. Sometimes, it only needed a single, honest moment, a gentle touch, and a willingness to listen. The two men remained there until the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming their faces. The past had been heavy, but the future felt lighter now, not because everything was perfect, but because something long overdue had finally been set right. And as Samuel looked out over his land, he felt something he hadn't expected: hope. The day after Samuel untied the rope, the ranch felt different. The land looked the same, the fields were still wide and open, the sky was still clear, and the wind still brushed gently across the grass. But something in the air had changed. It felt lighter, almost peaceful in a way Samuel had never noticed before. It was as if removing the rope had opened a quiet door, allowing a long-buried silence to finally breathe. Samuel walked slowly across the yard, heading toward the small guest room where Robert had rested for the night. The old man had been exhausted after the emotional day they shared. Samuel wanted to check on him before beginning his morning chores. When he reached the door, he knocked softly. A gentle voice answered, "Come in." Samuel stepped inside. Robert was sitting up on the bed, leaning against the pillow. He looked older this morning, not in a weak way, but in a peaceful way, as if he had let go of something heavy that had been pressing on his heart for many years. "How are you feeling?" Samuel asked kindly. "Lighter," Robert replied with a small smile. "Like I finally put something in its right place." Samuel nodded. He understood the feeling. He pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. "I want you to stay here as long as you need," Samuel said. "You don't have to rush back." Robert looked touched. "You're very kind. But I think I have found what I came for. I don't need much more." Samuel lowered his eyes for a moment. "I wish I had known the truth earlier," he said softly. "Maybe things could have been different for our families." Robert shook his head gently. "The past is already written, Samuel. We can't change it, but we can choose what we carry with us into the future. And you chose healing." Samuel felt warmth spread in his chest. He had never thought of it that way. He simply did what felt right after hearing the truth. But hearing Robert say those words gave new meaning to his decision. After a few moments of calm silence, Robert spoke again. "I want to tell you something more," he said slowly. Something I didn't say yesterday. Samuel listened attentively. My father always believed your grandfather would someday come and untie the rope, Robert said. He waited for it. Not because he wanted the land, or anything from your family, but because he wanted proof that their friendship mattered more than their disagreement. Samuel felt his heart tighten slightly. He imagined his grandfather, a strong man who worked hard every day, carrying silent regret. He wished he could go back in time and tell him it was okay to fix things, that it wasn't too late. But time didn't work that way. Robert continued. Your grandfather never untied it. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to face the past. He didn't know the right moment. And in waiting, the moment slipped away. Samuel let Robert's words sink in. He realized that untangling the past wasn't always easy, even for strong people. Sometimes the hardest knots were the ones inside the heart. Thank you for telling me, Samuel said quietly. Robert nodded. You deserve to know. Samuel helped the old man stand, and they walked outside slowly. The morning sun was bright, spreading warm light across the land. Robert smiled as his eyes traveled over the fields, the trees, and the open sky. This land is beautiful, he said softly. It always was. Samuel watched him with gentle respect. I'd like you to stay a little while longer. Maybe we could talk more about the old days. About what the ranch was like back then. Robert gave a warm, thoughtful smile. I would like that. Samuel helped him sit near the porch, where the view was wide and peaceful. Then he went inside to prepare breakfast, fresh bread, warm tea, and some fruit from the pantry. They ate together, speaking slowly, letting conversation flow naturally. Robert told stories about when the ranches worked together, stories of shared harvests, long summer days, and simple joys. Samuel listened with full attention, absorbing every detail. These stories felt like pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed. As they talked, Samuel realized something important. Healing was not just about untying a rope. It was also about understanding, sharing memories, and building something new from the old. By midday, Samuel walked Robert to the fence where the rope had hung. The old man moved slowly, but with purpose. When they reached the post, he placed a gentle hand on it. This place held a memory for so long, he said. Now it holds a new one. Samuel stood beside him, feeling the moment deeply. Would you like to keep the rope? Samuel asked softly. Robert looked at him and shook his head. No, he said with a small smile. It belongs to your family's story. Keep it, not as a sign of separation, but as a reminder of what was healed. Samuel nodded. The rope, once a symbol of division, had transformed into something else. Something meaningful. It held a lesson now. Together they walked back to the house. The afternoon sun warmed their backs, making the fields shine with a soft golden glow. Samuel felt grateful for the truth, for the chance to mend what was broken, and for the unexpected friendship growing between him and the old man. Later that evening, as the sky turned a gentle orange, Robert sat with Samuel outside the house. The quiet of the ranch felt comforting. Robert glanced at Samuel with thoughtful eyes. I should return home tomorrow, he said gently. I've done what I came for. Samuel felt a small ache in his chest, knowing the old man's visit had become meaningful to him. I understand, he said softly. But you'll always be welcome here. Robert smiled gratefully. Thank you, Samuel. That means more than you know. They sat together, watching the sun go down. The sky slowly shifted from orange to pink, then from pink to soft purple. It was a peaceful ending to an emotional day. That night, Samuel slept with a feeling of calm he had never experienced before. He felt connected to the past, to the land, and to the truth he had finally uncovered. The next morning, Samuel walked with Robert to the edge of the ranch. Robert stood there for a moment, looking over the open fields one last time. This place will always be part of my story, he said warmly. And now, Samuel answered softly. My story includes yours. They shared a quiet moment. Then Robert gave a gentle smile and began his journey back home. Samuel watched him walk until he disappeared down the path. The early sunlight touched everything gently, almost as if blessing the land. Samuel felt a peaceful fullness in his heart. He returned to the fence later that day. The post stood bare, but it no longer looked empty. It looked free. He touched the wood lightly and whispered, "It's done." As he walked back across the field, he felt a deep sense of understanding. The rope had stayed tied because of a misunderstanding. It was untied because of courage. And now, the land, just like the story, was open again, ready for new beginnings. Samuel knew he would carry the lesson with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the smallest act, like untying a simple rope, could heal something far bigger than anyone ever imagined. And as he continued his day, the ranch felt brighter, calmer, almost renewed, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment all along.